I listen most weeks to the rest and Question Time and the leading series on the rest of politics with you and Alistair. And I think your USP is your insights into global security. And it amazes me how you can go from Taiwan to Indonesia to Australia and different areas. So I'd like to, in the short time available to us, to focus on specific issues and how you think they'll play out. Ukraine.
First thing to understand about Ukraine is that it's all about leverage against Vladimir Putin. Russia is a much bigger country than Ukraine, got a much bigger population. It's been steadily advancing over the last year. So the question is, what would it take to bring Putin to the table? And the problem is that Trump has signaled that he agrees with most of Putin's talking points. He's also signaled that he thinks that Zelensky is the man that started the war, the Ukrainian president. He's effectively disabled a lot of the Ukrainian intelligence system. And he's given Putin the strong signal that all Trump cares about is getting out.
So what's the end game?
So the end game on that is one of two options, really. Either Ukraine tries to fight on entirely alone, in which case it is in unbelievable trouble. If it tries to fight on not only without the United States, but also without any European presence on the ground.
You seem you're not really holding out much hope for Starmer and Macron getting European presence?
Well, that's the second option. So the second option is that you put together some kind of European force, but don't underestimate the risks and dangers around that. Are European publics up for it? The leaders may be up for it, but the first thing that Putin will do if European troops deploy on the ground is send over a few deniable drones, kill a few European soldiers, claim it wasn't his fault, it was done by somebody else, and then wait to see how the European publics respond. He will be funding through other groups anti-war demonstrations. He will be doing his damnedest to undermine people's will, and above all, he'll be testing the deterrence. So yes, theoretically, Europe could step in, but it would need a degree of unity, will, and confidence and skill from statesmen in Europe.
But you're pretty pessimistic and grim as regards the future of Ukraine.
Yeah, it doesn't look good, I'm afraid.
Okay,
Yeah.
The Middle East. So we had a temporary ceasefire. It's all kicked off again. Obviously, the hostages is, a present impasse. There's 59 left. I interviewed the Israeli ambassador today to Ireland, and they aren't going nowhere. What do you see as the end game there in terms of a two-state solution, a Riviera for the Gaza? What do you see?
Very sadly, Trump has destroyed any real possibility of proper reconstruction of Gaza. There were a number of states who reluctantly were beginning to look at what they could do to rebuild Gaza, some of the Arab states, for example. But as soon as Trump has signaled that he believes in the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, has gone further than the Israelis further than the most extreme right-wing elements of Netanyahu's government in terms of his rhetoric towards Gaza, you're in a situation which I think becomes impossible. If you were Egyptian or Jordanian or Emirati or Saudi, why would you want to take responsibility for the reconstruction of Gaza if every time you rebuild a building, Israel reserves the right to blow it up again? If you're not able to create any kind of civil administration on the ground because you're stuck between Hamas on the one hand and Israel on the other. So I think the situation is very, very grim.
The future of NATO.
Future of NATO will have to be an attempt to reinvent a NATO without the United States, because in the end, NATO was an American production. NATO was underpinned by the US providing all this defense equipment, all this money, and above all, the US providing the nuclear shield. And Trump has now signaled that he's prepared to turn off US defense equipment at will. He's signaled that he's not particularly interested in defending the Baltic. He's flipped US policy on Ukraine in 2 months. And that means that the fundamental idea of NATO, which of course was designed to contain Russia, has been undermined by the most important ally in NATO.
One of the arguments for Trump being more friendly to Putin, he wants to prize Russia away from China. He regards China as the ultimate threat to US security and the particular problem of Taiwan. How big a threat do you rate China? Because on your last podcast, I was listening to their long-term planning and their recent party conference that you reviewed and so on. Do you detect the kind of ambitions that Putin has for an enlarged Russia, that China has similar ambitions?
I can't imagine for a moment why Putin would want to turn against China. He's much more dependent on China than he is on the US. China is underpinning all his oil sales. China is underpinning his economy. China is underpinning a lot of the material supply that keeps things going. So I think it would be profoundly naive of Trump to believe that he's clever enough to play Putin against China.
But China themselves, could you see it kicking off in Taiwan?
China, yes, it is a very, very significant power. It's conducted thousands, literally thousands of military operations in the straits between China and Taiwan. Xi Jinping's made no secret of the fact that he wants his legacy to include the reincorporation of Taiwan. But I think in the short term, the Chinese government may well conclude that they don't need to do anything. They can just sit back and allow the US to destroy its international reputation, and they can wait and see.
Your primary home, I understand, is in London, in Kensington. So let's talk a bit about British politics. Is Brexit reversible?
Brexit is reversible, but it would take a very, very long time. I think the practical thing to focus on in the short term is to at least rejoin the European Customs Union. And the great thing about rejoining the Customs Union...
Is that viable? Do you think it'll happen politically?
I think it's very difficult with Morgan McSweeney, who's Starmer's key advisor, chief of staff, who believes that the way to get votes in the red wall from Brexit voters is to keep beating up on the European Union and refusing to accept the idea of a customs union. But I think the logic for it is now very, very strong. The economic logic is strong, but also the security logic is strong. We can now see, as the United States becomes increasingly erratic, that Europe is not just geographically our closest neighbor, but culturally and in security terms our most reasonable neighbor.
What of the Tories? You have Reform there, Farage, thorn in their side, the first past the post system splits the vote. When do you see the Tories being back in power?
I think it's going to be a question of whether they're prepared to seize the centre ground. Their mistake is to chase Farage's votes. Farage is going to be better at being a right-wing populist than they are. He'll be better at banging the anti-immigration drum than they are. So the skillful move from the Conservatives will be to move back to the centre. And they could outflank Labour quite easily. They could be saying that Labour is economically incompetent and actually at the moment quite uncaring. One surprising thing you could do to Labour is to outflank them and say actually they are being too cruel on their welfare cuts. They're being too cruel on their cuts to international development. That would be an exciting thing for the Conservatives to do, but it would also something that would resonate with a moral message.
The final thing I want to talk about is tonight you're speaking to an Irish business, property mostly related audience invited by Savills. And the Irish economy and the Irish audience tonight, it's an extraordinary situation. We re-elected the centre ground government. Our corporation tax has gone in a decade from 4 billion to 28 billion. That sevenfold increase is paying for COVID and paying for big surpluses, the Apple money. We're very much in the line of fire for tariffs. These are US corporations, be they pharma or tech giants, that have created all this. Obviously, also after our crash here, it was international investment recovered the commercial property market. In terms of where you see Ireland, a neutral country, removing the triple lock as regards the UN for peacekeeping, but obviously it has no elaborate defence forces. Do you see a particular vulnerability for cybersecurity, for our cables, or do you think Britain will look after us?
I think Ireland is in a very tricky situation. Similar, for example, to Denmark. It's a country with incredible economic strengths. It's had an extraordinary economic success story. But in the end, like a country like Denmark, the population is relatively small, and you are very, very exposed economically to partners, neighbors, particularly to the United States, as you've pointed out, to global capital flows. And so Ireland is having to balance, on the one hand, that enormous dependence on the United States, which is tricky, very tricky, when you have Trump in power. I mean, Trump is increasingly on his way to being a proto-fascist, and it's going to begin to fundamentally challenge Ireland's democratic values.
So what advice would you give us?
I would say that this is where the European Union comes in, and this is where building European solidarity matters. But I also think it's worth looking seriously at the journey that Sweden's been on, that Finland's been on, and to begin questioning whether it's possible to remain detached from the defense and security infrastructure of Europe.